Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk all about sewing on sequins. As you can see, I have some samples here. I'm going to be showing you different techniques on hand sewing sequins, both individually and also on a strand, and then also how to do some strands by the sewing machine. So let's get started. I'm going to show you a couple of different options you can have when sewing on the individual sequins. Now I'm using cup sequins. And I like to sew it with the cup side facing up. That's cup side facing down, cup side facing up. Now you can do it down. It's entirely up to you. There are no rules. You can do whatever you want. So I like to use invisible thread, but you can use matching thread if you want. I'm actually going to be using some black all-purpose thread, so it's going to be a little bit easier for you to see. If you're going to do a design, I like to use my fabric marker to draw out the design so it's a lot easier for me to follow along without trying to eyeball it. If you're going to do an applique like I'm going to do with my mushroom here, it's easier if you cut out your design and then sew the sequins on top of it instead of trying to do it the other way around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a simple way to sew on the individual sequins. First, I'm going to take one, and if I'm doing an applique, I like to actually sew around the perimeter and then work my way in. So I'm going to start here on the outside. I'm just going to hold it with my finger. I apologize if my finger gets in the way, but they're really tiny. And I'm going to come up through the hole from underneath, and then I'm going to then go back down right outside the sequins. And then I'm going to go back up through the hole, if I can find it. There we go. And then go down on the other side. So you can do 2 stitches if you want. I like to do 3 because then I really make sure that it's secure. It also makes it a little bit more durable. Now if you're having trouble finding the hole, I like to go actually starting on the outside and then going down the middle. For me, that's easier. So now if I wanted to do another one, I actually like to have them overlapping a little bit because I don't like seeing my fabric underneath. If you want, you can put it right next to it. Like I said, you can do whatever you want, but I like to have it overlapping. So then I would just go about stitching on the next one. So I'm going to start on the outside because it's easier for me, and then go in the middle and do my 3 stitches. And after I stitch on a couple, I always like to do a knot on the back. It just helps. I mean, if you accidentally break a stitch, maybe you'll only lose a couple and then you can repair that, as opposed to you breaking a stitch and then losing all of them. So if you tie a knot in the back, it just makes it a little bit more durable. So I just do a simple knot. Just grab a little piece of the fabric, then go through my thread loop. And I don't cut it, then I just continue on. So that's one way to stitch them on. The second method is actually my favorite because it uses a seed bead in the middle of it. So you're going to start off very similar. I'm going to do this one in the middle just so it's easier for you to see it. And you're going to come up in the middle of it, just like before. You're going to grab one of your small beads. That's why it's a good idea to have a really small needle so you can get it through that. And then you're going to go back down through the middle of the sequence. And so you end up with a bead in the middle. So I like it because I think it looks neat and it looks a little bit more sparkly. So I like it. And also it takes 1 stitch. So for me, it feels like it's quicker than the other method. So let's show this again. So I'm going to place my sequence right there. I'm going to come up through the middle. There we go. I'm going to grab a bead, place it on my needle, and then go down directly in the middle. Just like that. The third way I'm going to show you how to do it is sort of creating a look of a string of sequins, but you're sewing them on individually. So if you need to do a whole line, you might prefer this method. So let's come up through the middle. And I'm just going to rotate this a little bit so it's a little easier for me. So I'm going to grab a little bit of fabric right next to it, and then I'm going to come up. So I'm going into the fabric and then coming out right next to it. And before I pull this out completely, let me grab another one of my sequins here, like this. I'm going to go through the bottom of the sequence, push it on there, and see how it ends up right next to it, like that. So now with this one on there, I'm going to do the same thing. Grab a little bit of fabric, come out almost directly next to it, and put another sequence on my needle, like that. And it definitely, you know, it's slow going at first. Well, it's slow going anyways, but it takes some practice. But once you get used to it, it'll get a lot faster. So now once I have this on here, again, just grab a little bit of fabric right next to it. And you're just trying to make the smallest stitch possible. So they kind of end up right next to each other. Grab another one, put it on there. And like I did before, just, you know, after you do a few of them, just make a knot in the back. Just like that. So obviously mine would end up straighter if I had drawn a line. I'm going to go down so you can see what it looks like. Pull that. There you go. So just sort of helps create a continual design like that. Depending on what you're doing, sometimes it's easier to use the pre-strun sequence, which I have here. So what I'm going to do is cut it a little bit longer than what I need. So I'm going to cut right there. And then I'm going to remove the last few off here. So remove those sequins. So then I have a strand hang out like this. I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side. I'm going to take a little bit of fabric glue and I'm going to put a dab of glue on the last strand. Just a little bit. I'm going to twist up the strand and I'm going to put it onto the glue. So that way it'll keep it from coming undone and kind of hold it. Now if you need to cut off these little strands at the bottom that are looking a little funky, you can do that too. So now it's ready to be hand sewn onto my design. To stitch on the strand, I'm going to come up from underneath right next to the strand. And then if you look underneath the strand, you'll see the row of string. So I'm just going to turn it back over. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and kind of go right in the middle of that strand. But I want to make sure that I go back into the fabric right where I came up. And it's going to be hidden underneath your strand. So here I've already stitched it and you can't even see it. So it definitely is still time consuming, but it's a lot easier because you don't have to do it for every single sequence. I skip maybe two or three. So I'm coming up through the fabric and then I'm going to lift this guy out of the way so you can see. And I'm going to go right into the middle, back through the fabric, right through the strand, because you'll see it's actually a bunch of strings together, and so you're kind of going in between them. And now I'm going to skip it, maybe go down about 3, and do the same process all over again. So here we have some finished examples, and it's kind of fun because you can create all different types of looks, such as on this one, I put the beads in the middle around the perimeter, but then I just did the basic stitch in the middle, and here I mixed different colors of sequins to create a different look. Now I like to sew, if I'm doing the applique, I like to sew on my sequins to a piece of felt. And you'll notice when you do it with your fabric, it might start to curl because of the weight of your sequins you're sewing on. So when I'm finished, I like to then use fabric glue to glue onto the back another piece of felt, and that definitely makes it a little bit more sturdier to do different projects with it. So now we're going to go over machine stitching sequins. I'm now going to show you how to use a sewing machine in order to stitch on strands of sequins. And it really isn't that much faster than doing it by hand because you have to go so slow and so careful. It helps if you have a special foot and setting on your sewing machine in order to do this, but I don't have it. So I'm just using a regular foot, and I'm laying out my strand in the design that I want. And you can see I pinned it by pinning the side of my fabric on the side of the strand, taking the straight pin over the strand and pinning it on the other side. For me, that's just the neatest way to do it. And when I'm placing it, you can run your finger over the strand and it should go smooth as it's going under the machine. If I were to run my finger in the opposite direction, I'll catch the sequin. So I don't want to do that, and I want it to run smooth. So you're going to make sure that the way that it's going under the foot is going to be the smooth direction. So after I have that, I'm going to thread my machine. I'm actually using the invisible thread on the top part of the machine, and I'm using all-purpose thread on the bobbin. So you don't need to use the invisible thread on the bobbin, just on the top, because that's the side you're going to see, and it makes it more stable. You may also have to fool with your thread tension. For me, I normally use around a 3, 3.5. When I'm using the invisible thread, I actually tighten it up to a 5. So it's a little bit of a tighter tension. So I would definitely practice a little bit on the fabric before stitching onto your sequins. So in this particular case, I'm actually going to just do a straight stitch right down the middle. I'm going to try to get it in the middle of each hole. And I actually have it as a basting stitch. So I have the largest stitch on my machine. And you may have to just fool with it and adjust it till you figure out what size stitch you need to do it in each hole. Now to get started, and actually for this whole thing, I'm actually going to be cranking my balancing wheel. That's the wheel that's on the side that moves the needle up and down by hand. So I'm not really using the foot pedal. Now what happens if you use the foot pedal, obviously you're going to go faster, but you're going to miss holes, and the needle is going to puncture right through your sequin and miss the hole. So it won't look as neat. I mean, you can do it, it just won't look as neat, and you could break the sequin itself and it could fall off. So I'm just going to move it by hand and it gets in the hole. Now sometimes like this is going to actually go past the hole, so I'm going to trick the machine, lift the foot and just kind of shift it back until I get right in there. And once I can get this out, and this is how I'm going to go. It's definitely easier if you're doing a straight line as a curve, but you can do a curve as well. So I'm just being very careful and looking at each one individually. And I would just do this for the whole thing. The second way to do it is using a zigzag stitch, and by zigzag I mean the biggest zigzag stitch you can possibly do on your machine, because the idea is you're going to be stitching over the top of the strand going into the fabric on either side, trying not to puncture your sequins. So I like to start at a part of the strand where it's not the widest part of the circle, but maybe in between the two circles. And I start off, as always, by hand. And if it looks like it's working out, like it's not touching the sequence, you could probably do it with the foot pedal and go a lot faster than the previous stitch. I still like to kind of do it by hand because I like to really make sure that if I need to adjust it, I can do that and cheat it a little bit. And those are the two ways you can do it with your machine. Here we have the two examples. So this one right here is the straight stitch I did, and you can't really tell, it's pretty unnoticeable. This one right here is the zigzag stitch, and you can definitely see the invisible thread going back and forth. But for me, I think it's a little bit faster, and you don't have to use the invisible thread. You can use matching thread if you don't mind seeing a little bit. So it's entirely up to you and your choice on what you want to do. But those are some options you have in sewing on sequins. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 100 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!